Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening a file that is, quite honestly, one of the most baffling, disturbing, and frankly, paradoxical puzzles in the entire history of modern religion.
It really is.
We are looking at the Order of the Solar Temple, often just referred to as the OTS. And before we even get into the timeline or the specific beliefs, I have to ask you to do something for me. I want you to take the standard image you have in your head when you hear the word cult, and I want you to completely erase it.
That is the absolute necessary first step for this specific topic. I mean, usually when we discuss high control groups or catastrophic new religious movements, the stereotype is immediate.
Oh, yeah, you know exactly what it is.
You picture the vulnerable, the socially isolated, maybe drifters or young people looking for a place to belong because, they have nowhere else to go.
Right. You picture a commune out in the desert somewhere, people maybe wearing burlap sacks, living completely off the grid.
Exactly. You think of people who have sort of dropped out of society.
Right.
But the Order of the Solar Temple, that is a completely different beast.
It's a whole different beast. We're talking about what some researchers call the paradox of profile here. When investigators started digging into who these people were after the tragedies, which, believe me, we will get to, they didn't find dropouts.
No.
They found the elite. They found the people who were running society, not running away from it.
It's the defining contradiction of the OTS, and it's what makes this story so chilling. We aren't talking about lost souls on the fringes. Not at all.
So who are we talking about then?
We're looking at people like Robert Ostagai, who was the sitting mayor of the town of Richelieu in Quebec.
A sitting mayor.
A mayor. We're looking at Jocelyn Grandmaison, a journalist for Le Journal de Quebec, a woman whose entire job was to ask hard questions and be skeptical.
And it doesn't stop there.
Not even close. We're talking about Camille Pilet, who was a sales director for Piaget watches.
The luxury watch brand.
The luxury watch brand. I mean, a man deeply embedded in the corporate world of, luxury and precision. These are successful, educated, wealthy people.
And I think the one that always gets me is the connection to the Olympics. The family of an Olympic gold medalist, Jean Voirnet, the skier who launched that massive sunglasses brand.
Everybody knows the sunglasses.
Exactly. His wife and son were deeply, deeply involved. And that right there, that's the hook that just grabs you immediately. How does a mayor, a journalist, a luxury watch executive end up in a group that believes they are reincarnated Knights Templar preparing to catch a UFO to the star Sirius?
That is the mission of this deep dive today. That's what we have to unpack. How this bizarre cocktail of Templar mythology, UFO religion, and New Age philosophy didn't just result in a few weird meetings in a basement somewhere.
No, it led to the deaths of 74 people across 3 countries.
74 people. It's a dark journey for sure. But we have a really detailed historical overview to work through. We're going to look at the group's classification, their incredibly complex organizational structure, their syncretic beliefs, and the timeline that led to their tragic end in the mid-90s.
So let's start where all these stories inevitably start. The architects, the people who built this machine from the ground up. It seems like the OTS had a classic dynamic at the top of duo. You had the face and you had the brain. Let's talk about the brain first.
Yeah.
Joseph Di Mambro.
Joseph Di Mambro is absolutely the man behind the curtain. He was born in France, a jeweler by trade, which is a detail that actually matters a lot later when we talk about the visuals of the group.
The aesthetics.
The whole aesthetic, yes. But his real resume, his real background, was in the world of esotericism. And, it must be said, fraud.
Okay, so not just a spiritual seeker, actual fraud.
Oh, yeah. Before the OTS really got going, he had a history. A criminal history. In the early 70s, he actually served prison time, I think it was 6 months, for writing bad checks.
All right, so that's a red flag.
A big one. And interestingly, he was also convicted for impersonating a psychologist.
Wait, impersonating a psychologist, that feels like a major, major red flag for someone who eventually ends up leading a group where he controls people's minds. It's almost like he was practicing.
It certainly speaks to a desire to have authority over the human psyche. Right? He wanted the power of that doctor-patient relationship, but without, the degree or the ethics.
So this is the guy pulling the strings.
He was the absolute authority within the order, but he wasn't necessarily the one on the stage holding the microphone. He managed the experience. He was the director and the stories he told about himself.
Let me guess, he had some impressive past lives.
The best. He claimed to have had incredible past lives. He told members he had been an Egyptian pharaoh, he had been Moses, he was a member of the 12 disciples. He positioned himself as the sole connection to the divine, the channel through which these beings he called the masters spoke.
But a guy like Di Mambro, you said he was a bit older, not exactly a charismatic movie star type, and he's got a criminal record for fraud. He might have trouble recruiting the beautiful people, the wealthy elite on his own.
Right. He lacked that immediate magnetic charm. He needed a salesman.
And that's where Luc Jouret comes in.
Precisely. Luc Jouret was the front man. He was Belgian, a trained physician, specifically a homeopath. He was younger, he was charismatic, he was good-looking, he made his living lecturing on alternative medicine, ecology, spirituality. He could walk into a room and just command it.
He had that shimmer.
He had the shimmer that Di Mambro lacked. Absolutely.
So it's the perfect and ultimately deadly partnership.
Yeah.
How did they actually connect? How did they meet?
It happened around 1981. Jouret was invited to speak at a foundation that Di Mambro had already set up, a group called the Golden Way Foundation. And Di Mambro sat there in the audience, and he watched this young doctor speak, saw how he just captivated the crowd with all this talk of holistic health and spiritual energy, and you can almost see the light bulb go off. He realized, this is the voice I need.
So he just recruits him on the spot.
Pretty much. He was so impressed by his lecture, and they formed this symbiosis. Jouret became the recruiter, the propagandist who could bring people in to the soft entry points of health and ecology.
While Di Mambro pulled the strings from the shadows.
Exactly.
So Jouret is the bait. He's out there talking about homeopathy and saving the environment, and people think, this guy makes sense, he's a doctor, he's articulate. But once they're in, they get funneled into something much, much deeper.
That's the system.
Let's talk about the structure they built, because it wasn't just sign up and you're in the cult. It was designed like a maze. It was layered.
Deeply layered. Scholars have compared their structure to a Chinese box, boxes within boxes within boxes. It was designed as a filter to slowly indoctrinate members.
So what's the outer box, the one everyone can see?
At the outer layer, you had the public face. These were clubs like the Amenta Club or the Atlanta Club. If you went to one of their meetings, you'd hear Jouret lecturing on naturopathy, organic gardening, maybe some light spiritual ideas about the coming age of Aquarius.
So very approachable stuff you'd see in any New Age bookstore in the 80s.
Very approachable. Very 1980s New Age. You could go there and just learn about eating better and feel good about yourself. No commitment.
Okay, so you go for the organic gardening tips, but then maybe you show a little more interest. Or maybe, and I'm guessing this is more important, you show that you have money. What's the next box?
That's the key. If you seemed receptive, and specifically if you had the right financial profile, you might be invited to the Arcadia clubs. This was the middle layer.
And things get more serious here.
Much more serious. It was more secretive, more ritualistic. Here, the talk shifted from ecology to esotericism. You weren't just saving the earth anymore. You're learning about hidden knowledge, secret histories.
And if you pass the tests there, if you show loyalty and obedience,
then you might eventually reach the inner core, the Order of the Solar Temple itself.
And this is where the neo-Templar thing comes in, right? Because Solar Temple implies a connection to the Knights Templar. For those who might be a bit rusty on their medieval history, the original Knights Templar were those crusading warrior monks who got, famously dissolved and burned at the stake in the 1300s.
Right.
Why did this group in the 1980s think they were them?
This is a crucial part of their mythology. There is a whole subculture, really, called neo-Templarism. It's made up of groups that claim a secret, unbroken lineage going all the way back to Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars who was burned in 1314.
So the idea is the Templars never really died out.
Exactly. The OTS claimed that the order didn't actually die, but that it went underground, and that they were the continuation of that true lineage. Di Mambro and Jouret tapped into this pre-existing world of people who were already fascinated by this romantic, persecuted history.
It's a really powerful narrative, isn't it? It tells the member, you aren't just a dentist from Geneva. You are a knight. You are part of an ancient, secret history.
It absolutely is. It appeals to a desire for nobility and secret importance. And in fact, the OTS was formed partly out of a schism from another group called the Renewed Order of the Temple, or OT. They basically positioned themselves as the true revival, the real deal.
So they're taking this romantic idea of being a knight, a guardian of secret knowledge, and they're mixing it with, well, everything else. Let's move into section 2 and look at this belief cocktail, because it is wild. It's not just Templars.
No.
It's Templars in space.
It is an incredibly syncretic mix. And syncretic just means they combined disparate elements from all these different religions and philosophies.
Yeah.
You have the Templar tradition, yes, that's the foundation.
But then they start layering things on top.
Right. You also have Rosicrucianism, which is another mystical secret society tradition involving alchemy and spiritual transformation. You have Theosophy, which is where they get the idea of ascended masters, these spiritual beings who guide humanity from behind the scenes.
And then you layer on top of all of that a heavy dose of UFO religion.
A very heavy dose.
Okay.
The UFO part is where it really veers off the medieval path. They believe these ascended masters weren't just spirits, but they had a specific address, a physical location.
And that address was?
They believe the ascended masters resided on the star Sirius. This is absolutely central to their theology. They believed that the Solar Temple members were Solar Templars. They weren't just regular people. They were souls that had been awakened to their true nature. And often, that nature was linked to reincarnation.
Reincarnation was a huge tool for Di Mambro, wasn't it? It wasn't just, oh, you lived before. It was, you were someone famous and important before.
It was a primary control mechanism, absolutely. Di Mambro would reveal to members who they were in a past life. And of course, Di Mambro himself had the best resume.
As you said, Moses, a pharaoh.
Right. And Jouret, the frontman, he was identified as Bernard of Clairvaux, who was the founder of the original Templar order. But for the members, these past life identities gave them a sense of cosmic importance. I mean, think about it. If you are told you are a knight who was burned at the stake for the cause in the 14th century, you feel a massive obligation to the group in the 20th century.
It creates a debt you can never repay.
A debt and a sense of destiny. You aren't just joining a club, you are rejoining your eternal family.
And all of this was framed against a ticking clock. We see this in so many doomsday groups. They believe the world was changing, right? The age of Aquarius?
Yes, but their version of the age of Aquarius wasn't the peace and love version from the musical Hair.
Not exactly.
Not at all. It was apocalyptic. They believed the Earth was moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, and that this transition would not be smooth. They believed in an apocalyptic fire, that the Earth would be consumed, destroyed by ecological and spiritual collapse. And the only way to survive
Was to not be here when it happened.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the most dangerous word in their entire vocabulary, a word that became their directive. Transit.
Transit. This is the concept that evolved so fatally over time.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, the term was borrowed from Amoros, a Rosicrucian group Di Mambro had been a part of. And in that context, transit usually just meant the natural death and transition of the soul.
Or metaphor.
Right, or sometimes in the early days of the OTS, it was just metaphorical, a spiritual evolution, a rising in consciousness.
But then it started getting a lot more literal.
It did. As the group became more isolated and more paranoid, the definition of transit morphed. It went from a voluntary departure to another dimension, perhaps via a UFO, or crossing through a mirror into a parallel world, to a ritualistic death.
So it became a plan.
The idea was that to acquire their solar bodies and reach Sirius to continue their mission, they had to leave their earthly vessels behind. Transit became the euphemism for suicide and eventually for murder.
It's terrifying how a word can be twisted like that. You think you're signing up for a spiritual journey and suddenly transit means something horrific. I want to look at what life was actually like inside the order before things went completely off the rails.
Okay.
Because to keep these wealthy, educated people hooked, they had to put on a show, and I mean that literally.
The aesthetics were incredibly important. You have to remember, Di Mambro was a jeweler. He appreciated beauty, presentation, lighting, and they had money millions flowed in from these wealthy donors.
And they spent it.
They spent it on high-budget rituals. They had custom-made robes with Templar crosses, broadswords, gold chalices. They used lighting effects that would rival a theater production. They played Wagner at high volume. It was designed to be a complete sensory overload.
To create an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah.
But they had special effects that went beyond just, mood lighting. They had masters actually appearing in the room.
This is one of the most cynical aspects of Di Mambro's control, and it's the smoking gun for the fraud. He built underground sanctuaries in their properties, actual crypts.
Like in the basement.
Underground. Members would be led down into these crypts, and they would see visual manifestations of the ascended masters. They would hear these booming voices giving them instructions. For years, members genuinely believed they were in the physical presence of divine beings.
But they weren't. What was it?
No. It turns out these were holograms. Well, not technically holograms in the Star Wars sense, but sophisticated visual tricks involving mirrors and light projections.
Like an old magic, right?
A very sophisticated magic trick. They had a member named Tony Dutoit, who was the lighting technician. He was the guy who set up these illusions. So when the master told you to donate more money or to break up with your wife...
It wasn't just Di Mambro telling you.
No, it was a glowing, ethereal being from another dimension telling you. That is a powerful level of manipulation. It bypasses your critical thinking because you saw it with your own eyes.
You mentioned breaking up with your wife. That leads us to another one of their concepts, cosmic coupling. This is another one of those terms that sounds kind of groovy, but is actually a tool for total domination.
It's a classic cult technique. Scholars call it defamiliarization. The goal is to break the bonds you have with your earthly family, your spouse, your parents, your children, so that your only loyalty is to the order.
So how did it work?
Di Mambro or Jouret would look at a married couple, maybe a couple that had been together for 20 years, who loved each other, and say, your karmic cycle together is finished. You are cosmically incompatible. You are holding each other back.
And then they would just reassign them, just like that.
Immediately. They would be forced to separate and were assigned new karmic partners. And these new pairings were often bizarre and disturbing.
Like what?
They would pair a woman in her 30s with a 14-year-old boy. The justification was always spiritual, that they were matching discarnate archetypal forms, not just bodies. But the real effect was to shatter the family unit and create total dependency on the leaders. If you can't rely on your spouse, who do you rely on?
You have to rely on the order. And speaking of shattering families and creating new ones, we have to talk about the cosmic child. This part of the story centers on a girl named Emmanuelle.
This is absolutely central to the group's mythology and ultimately its collapse. Di Mambro had a daughter, Emmanuelle, who was born in 1982. Her mother was Dominique Belleton, who was Di Mambro's mistress. But Di Mambro claimed that he didn't biologically father her in the normal way.
Okay.
He claimed she was immaculately conceived through the power of his mind.
That is a bold claim. He thought his thoughts got her pregnant.
That was the official doctrine. And because of this supposedly miraculous origin, the pressure put on this poor child was immense. She was considered the Christ of the new generation, an avatar.
Just a casual amount of pressure for a kid.
Right. And Di Mambro actually claimed she was a male soul trapped in a female body, because a female body was considered imperfect in his twisted theology. They often referred to her as he.
That's incredibly strange.
It gets stranger. She had to wear a helmet and gloves when she was around other people to protect her purity and her aura. She was kept isolated, treated as a deity, and was raised to be the conscience of the new humanity.
Imagine growing up like that, wearing a helmet, being worshipped, told you're a male soul from the stars. But kids grow up. And that brings us to section 4, the decline. Because you can only keep a hologram show and a cosmic child act going for so long before reality starts knocking on the door.
And it started knocking hard in the early 90s. The cracks really began to appear. First, there was financial strain.
But they had all these rich donors.
They did. Yes, they had wealthy donors like Camille Pilot, who gave millions, but they were burning through cash. They were buying real estate in Canada and Switzerland, maintaining this lavish lifestyle for the leaders. The money was going out faster than it was coming in.
But the bigger blow was the loss of faith.
Much bigger. The hologram thing came out. In a twist of irony, Di Mambro's own son, Eli, discovered the fraud. He figured out the masters were just visual effects. And Tony Dutoit, the technician who set it all up, he eventually left the group and confirmed it to others.
So the secret was out.
The secret was out. And when word got around that the divine visions were just stage magic, there was an exodus. In 1990 and 1991, a significant number of members walked away. They realized they had been duped.
So Di Mambro is losing his audience. He's losing his revenue stream. And then the cosmic child, Emmanuelle, starts acting like, well, a regular preteen.
Exactly. By the early 90s, Emmanuelle is hitting puberty. She's around 12 years old, and she starts rebelling. She doesn't want to be the cosmic Christ anymore. She wants to listen to pop music. She wants to be a normal teenager.
Which for Di Mambro must have been a catastrophe.
A cosmic catastrophe. He didn't see it as teenage rebellion. He viewed her rejection of her sacred role as a sign that dark forces were attacking the order through her.
And then comes the external pressure, the gun scandal. This is the moment where the outside world, the law, finally gets involved. What happened there?
This was in Canada. Jouret, the frontman, asked members to buy 3 semi-automatic guns. But specifically, he wanted silencers. Now, buying guns is one thing, but silencers, that raises immediate red flags.
For anyone.
Yeah, so in 1993, the members were caught, and Jouret and 2 others were arrested.
Why did they say they wanted silencers? Did they have a cover story?
The explanation given to the public and the courts was vague. Something about self-defense or survivalism, but in hindsight, knowing what came later, the implications are just chilling.
So what happened in court?
They got off with a suspended sentence and a fine, but the real damage was done. The media started paying attention. Journalists started asking, who are these people? Why do these supposed spiritualists need silencers?
And for a group that thrives on secrecy, media scrutiny is poison.
It triggered intense paranoia. Di Mambro and Jouret began to view the police, the media, and the government not just as annoyances, but as agents of a cosmic conspiracy against them. They believed this was the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age prophesies in some traditions. They felt the world was rejecting them, so they decided to reject the world.
And then Di Mambro identified a specific enemy, a personal enemy, an antichrist.
Yes.
And this antichrist wasn't a politician or a general, it was a baby.
It was a baby. Tony Dutoit, the lighting technician who had left the group, the man who knew the secrets of the holograms, he and his wife Nikki had a baby boy in 1994. And they named him Christopher Emmanuel.
Emmanuel, just like Di Mambro's daughter.
Exactly. Di Mambro took this as a personal insult and a cosmic threat. He believed this baby was the Antichrist, sent to threaten the supremacy of his own cosmic child, Emmanuel. The name's similarity, the betrayal by the father, it all just crystallized Di Mambro's madness.
So you have financial ruin, a rebellious messiah, exposure of their tricks, legal trouble, and now a perceived Antichrist. The walls are closing in.
They are closing in fast.
And this leads us to Section 5, the tragedies. This is where the transit stops being a theory and becomes a very real, very bloody plan.
It begins in October 1994. We call this the first wave. And it happened almost simultaneously across the Atlantic, which just shows the level of coordination involved.
Let's start in Quebec, Morin Heights. This is where the Antichrist baby was.
Yes. On September 30th, 1994, Di Mambro ordered the elimination of the Antichrist. 2 fervent members, Joel Egger and Dominique Belleton,
The mother of the cosmic child.
the mother of Emmanuel, they lured the Dutoit family to a chalet in Morin Heights. Tony Dutoit, his wife Nikki, and their infant son were murdered. It was brutal and ritualistic. They were stabbed repeatedly.
It's just horrific. They murdered a baby because they thought he was the Antichrist.
And then, the perpetrators, Egger and Belleton, they fled to Switzerland. 2 other members, a couple named the Genouds, stayed behind to clean up and set incendiary timers to burn the house down. They eventually died in that fire days later. But the main event was shifting to Switzerland.
Chury and Salvin, 2 small villages in Switzerland. This is where the mass death happened.
On the night of October 4th to 5th, the authorities responded to fires in these 2 locations. In Chury, they found 23 bodies in a farm. In Salvin, they found 25 bodies in 3 chalets.
And this is where the distinction between suicide and murder gets very, very blurry, right?
It's not just blurry. The investigation proved it was a mix. The OTS leadership, in their testament letters that they mailed out to media and family,
They left a note.
a big one, they categorized the deaths into 3 groups. First, you had the traitors. These were people they wanted to eliminate. At Chury, many victims were shot. Evidence showed 20 of them were shot with the same gun. Many had been drugged with sleeping pills first. Some were suffocated with plastic bags. These were executions.
So they called them traitors and just murdered them in their sleep.
Correct. Then you had the immortals. These were committed members who perhaps didn't have the strength to pull the trigger themselves. They were helped to die assisted suicide effectively.
And the third group.
The awakened. These were the core leaders and the most true believers, including Di Mambro and Jouret themselves, who committed voluntary suicide. At Salvin, poison injections were used, and then fires were set to destroy the bodies and the earthly evidence.
And those letters they sent out, the testament, what was the point? What did they say?
They wanted to control the narrative even in death. They claimed they were leaving this earth because it was too corrupt, that they were transiting to Sirius to prepare for the new solar age. They spun it as a glorious, defiant departure, not a massacre.
You would think, after more than 50 people die, that the story ends there. The leaders are dead, the spell should be broken for anyone left. But it wasn't.
That is a terrible tragedy of the millenarian mindset. When the prophecy fails, or when the leaders die, sometimes the belief intensifies for the survivors. They feel they were left behind. This brings us to the second wave, in December 1995.
This was in the Vercors Massif in France.
Yes. 16 bodies were found in a remote clearing in the mountains. They were arranged in a star formation. The investigation revealed that 14 of them had been shot, by two other members, a man named Jean-Pierre Lardanchet and another named André Friedli, who then immolated the bodies and killed themselves.
But why? Why do it a year later?
The psychology was that they had missed the bus. That was the phrase they used. They regretted not being part of the 1994 transit. They felt stuck in a doomed world without their leaders, and they wanted to rejoin them on Sirius. It speaks to how deeply the indoctrination had taken hold. Even without Di Mambro whispering in their ears, the program was still running in their minds.
And then, unbelievably, there was a third wave. March 1997, back in Quebec again, St. Casimir. This one hits differently because of the children who were involved.
The St. Casimir incident is just heartbreaking. 5 people died in a burning house. It was 2 couples, the Quezes and the Klauses, and one of their mothers. But inside that house were also 3 teenagers, the children of the Quez couple.
And they survived.
They did. And the story they told is terrifying. The adults wanted to take the children with them. They wanted the whole family to transit together. The teenagers, who had lived on the periphery of this belief system, they effectively had to negotiate for their lives.
Imagine that conversation, having to convince your parents not to kill you.
It's unimaginable. And it gets worse. The adults tried to set the house on fire and kill themselves, but they failed. The timing devices didn't work, or they were too sick from the drugs they took. So they actually asked the teenagers to help them.
Help them die.
Yes. The teenagers, in a state of shock and likely conditioned obedience, eventually set the fire that killed their parents, as requested, and then they escaped.
That's an absolute nightmare, those poor kids.
It just shows the absolute warping of reality that the OTS created. For the parents, asking their kids to light the fire was, in their twisted logic, a final act of love or a final instruction. For the kids, it was the only way to end the horror and get out.
So, after 74 deaths, the violence finally stopped, but the questions didn't. Let's move to the aftermath. Because usually when a cult ends like this, there's no one left to prosecute. But there was one high-ranking survivor, Michel Tabachnik.
Michel Tabachnik. He was a famous conductor, a legitimate high-profile musician. He had been very close to Di Mambro. He was the president of the old Golden Way Foundation. He had written many of the philosophical, esoteric texts used by the order, but he didn't die in the transits.
So he was put on trial. What was the charge?
He was accused of criminal conspiracy. The argument from the prosecution was that his writings provided the ideological framework that made the suicides possible, that he was effectively the intellectual author of the deaths.
Did it stick?
No, he was acquitted twice. The court couldn't prove a direct causal link between his esoteric writings and the specific decision to commit mass suicide and murder. Tabachnik argued he was just a seeker who had no idea Di Mambro was planning violence.
And is that believable?
Whether that is true or not is still debated by those who study the case, but legally he was cleared.
And because of the wealth, the connections, the sheer weirdness of it all, the conspiracy theories must have been absolutely rampant.
Oh, completely. People could not accept that a mayor, a watch executive, and government officials would join a cult and kill themselves. It just didn't fit the narrative. So theories exploded. It was all a front for money laundering. It was government hits, far-right political intrigue, arms dealing.
Was there any truth to any of it?
Well, the official investigations found no evidence of massive money laundering or external hit squads. The mundane, and frankly more terrifying truth, is that wealthy, smart people are just as susceptible to spiritual manipulation as anyone else. But the conspiracy theories served a psychological purpose. They allowed the public to avoid facing the uncomfortable reality of how fragile the human mind can be.
Culturally, though, this changed things in Europe, didn't it? This was a big deal.
A huge impact. In the U.S., you had Jonestown and Waco as these reference points. In Europe, the OTS was the watershed moment. It led to something called the Gaillard Commission in France, and very strict anti-cult laws in both France and Belgium. It shifted the government stance from religious freedom means hands-off to we need to monitor these groups to protect our citizens. The sect, the French word for cult, became a target of state surveillance in a way it hadn't been before.
So as we wrap this up, let's try to summarize this tragedy. 74 people dead in a quest for a solar body. What is the big takeaway here for you?
For me, the OTS challenges our arrogance. We like to think, oh, I'm too smart to join a cult, or I have a good job, I have a family, I'm grounded. The OTS proves that intelligence and success are not a shield against indoctrination.
In fact, it might have been part of the appeal.
I think so. Di Mambro preyed on people who felt they were too special for the ordinary world. He sold them elitism. He sold them the idea that they were chosen superior souls. And that appeal to narcissism is a very powerful drug.
So it wasn't about desperation, it was about bespiration. They wanted to be more than just successful humans. They wanted to be solar gods.
Precisely. And the mechanism was a closed logic system. Once you accepted the first premise that we are reincarnated Templars, the world is ending, and Di Mambro speaks for the Masters, then every other terrible thing, from giving up your money to giving up your life, becomes a logical next step.
It's a sobering reminder of the power of belief. I want to leave you, our listener, with a thought to mull over. We talked about the concept of transit, the promise of a perfect world somewhere else. We often think of hope as a good thing, a positive force.
Right.
But in the case of the Solar Temple, hope for a better place was weaponized. It makes you wonder, at what point does the promise of a paradise there become the most dangerous weapon against living your life here?
That is the ultimate danger, isn't it? When the next world becomes more real and more important than this one, you are capable of destroying everything around you to get there.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Stay curious, stay grounded, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Goodbye.